Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last stay-at-home lecture for 2024. Glad to have you here. I am Tim Nutt, the director of the UAMS Historical Research Center, which is the archives division of the UAMS library and for the university, and which is where we preserve the institutional record of the medical school and the educational parts and different divisions of the university. We're located in the UAMS library, as I mentioned. We're on the 5th floor of the library. I'd love to have you visit us sometime, show you around, give you a tour, and show you some of the artifacts and our other archival materials on our history of medicine book collection. So if you're interested in that, contact information is on the screen. Please shoot an email or call me at the number on the screen. The stay-at-home lectures are sponsored by the Society for the History of Medicine and the Health Professions, which is the support organization for the Historical Research Center. And they support us in a number of ways. This program is part of the larger programming activities of the society, and this is held every month on the first Thursday from noon to 1. And then the society also helps us in other ways by providing some financial support when we need to purchase books or materials or archival collections that we maybe not be able to afford on our own. And so the society really helps us out in acquiring materials for our collection. In addition to the programming, as I mentioned, and other activities throughout the year. We'd love to have you join as a member of the society. The dues are inexpensive, $15 for an individual or $25 for family membership. There is a student membership for $5, and you do not have to just only be a student at UAMS. You can be a high school student, you can be a university student at U of A in Fayetteville or Arkansas State in Jonesboro, or even out of state. So I encourage you to check out the URL on your screen. But if you are interested in joining and you feel like you're ready to make that commitment, you can just go ahead and go to paypal.me/SHMHP, and you can just enter your membership information there, and it'll be stress-free and hassle-free. So I hope you'll consider doing that. As I mentioned, this lecture series rather, is held on the first Thursday of every month from 12 noon to 1 p.m. But since we start 2025, January 2nd is the first Thursday. There will not be a lecture in January of 2025 on January 2nd. We will resume again in February. I don't know exactly who will or what the topic will be, but I will be sure and let you know. And if you are interested, if you're not on the mailing list, please, and if you'd like to be on the email distribution list to get announcements and such, you can also use that email that I'm putting back on the screen, hrc@uams.edu, and just let me know that you'd like to be on the email distribution list, and I'll put you on that. We also advertise the programs on Facebook. So you can also follow the Historical Research Center and the Society on Facebook and get those announcements as well. The link that you used to join today will be the same one for all of the lectures next year. So feel free to write that down. Don't worry, it's always in the email and in the announcements that we send out about the programs that are coming up. So today I am excited to talk about a pioneering physician in Arkansas, Dr. Ida Jo Brooks. And in my opinion, I don't think that she's recognized as much as she should be recognized for her work that she did for the medical field and the psychiatry field here in Little Rock, and just for the women's rights movement, suffrage movement participation in that. I just don't think she gets enough recognition. So today we're going to be talking about Dr. Brooks and a little bit about her life and a little bit about her career in Arkansas. So I hope you enjoy it. So Ida Jo Brooks was born in Muscatine, Iowa. She was the daughter of Reverend Joseph Brooks, who was a Methodist minister, and Elizabeth Goodnow, Brooks. And she was one of 6 children. She was born in 1853, as I mentioned, in Iowa. And here is just to show you where in the state of Iowa, where Muscatine County where Muscatine is located. Muscatine is in Muscatine County. So they were there. As I said, she was born in 1853. In the late 1860s, immediately after the Civil War, the family moved to St. Louis, and that is where she spent most of her childhood, and she ended up graduating from St. Louis High School. Now, before I get into her career, and I need to talk about her father for just a little bit, but I don't want him and his activities and his role in Arkansas politics to overshadow her. But it's good to know that her father was, as I mentioned, Reverend Joseph Brooks, and in 1874, he and Governor Elisha Baxter had an armed conflict about who really won the gubernatorial race in 1874, excuse me. So it was a contested race. Both sides believed that they had won. Brooks actually took up residence in the state house and fortified it with armory and arms and soldiers. And then Elisha Baxter was sort of ensconced down on Markham Street rather, in a hotel. And so they just sort of were at odds. And it turned deadly over the course of the two months. There were a number of battles. There was a battle of Palarm Creek, where a ship was coming from Fort Smith with ammunitions, and they were hijacked by the Brooks forces. The Brooks forces were hijacked by the Baxter forces at Palarm, up near Faulkner County and Pulaski County lines. So there was an engagement there where they sunk the Haley, a steamboat that had ammunitions on it. There was a conflict at New Gascony near Pine Bluff. And so this went on, and there were a number of people killed during this conflict. It was finally decided that Baxter had won the gubernatorial race, and so he was installed as governor, and Brooks left the state house, and so that was the end of that and the end of Reconstruction in Arkansas. But that's kind of nice to know because of Reverend Brooks's and his relationship with Dr. Ida Jo Brooks. Now, there is a remnant of the Brooks-Baxter War. You can still see it. It's at the old State House. It's the cannon that sits on the front lawn. It's called Lady Baxter. And so that was one of the cannons that were used during that conflict. So if you're ever at the old State House and you see that cannon, now you know what that is. So now let's get back to Dr. Ida Jo Brooks. As I mentioned, she graduated from high school in St. Louis in 1870. She was at the top of her class. You can see in this newspaper article that she was number 3 in the class, or at least alphabetically, she was number 3. This article, where that comes from, was like the top 10 students in the class. So she stays in 1870. Right after she graduates, the family moves to Little Rock about 1872, 1873, and she gets a job. Ida Jo gets a job as a teacher in the First Ward School, also known as the Sherman School. It was originally a one-room schoolhouse. And so she taught there for just one semester, really, because in October of 1873, that school, the First Ward School, had burned down. By 1876, she was serving as principal of the Little Rock High School. Now, after teaching for several years in the public schools in Little Rock, she went to Drury College in Springfield, Missouri, to work on her master's degree. And then in 1877, after she came back from Drury, she was elected president of the State Teachers Association in Arkansas. So when she gets back to Little Rock, she gets her a degree from Little Rock University, which was a private university established in the early 1880s, originally downtown on Main Street, but they eventually built this building in 1882, as you can see on your screen, this sort of castle-looking building. And that became Little Rock University. It was sponsored by the Methodist Episcopal Church. And it stood, if you're going off Cantrell from downtown, right where La Harpe becomes Cantrell, right before the Dillard's headquarters, just to your right, is where this building stood, just overlooking the Arkansas River. Later, this building was part of the Maddox Seminary for Women in the 1890s. And then in 1906, the building became the College of Physicians and Surgeons, which was a rival school to the medical school, to UAMS. So Ida Jo Brooks graduates from this in 1877. And then the same year, she's elected to the president of the State Teachers Association. Now, after she gets her degree from Drury, she comes back to Little Rock, and she works for the Little Rock University, where she's a faculty member, and she teaches mathematics from 1882 to 1888. And that's just an article that was in the newspaper, and actually in a New York newspaper, about her teaching mathematics at the university. So in 1879, after she's taught a few years, she decides that she wants to go to medical school. So this is in the 1888 is when she left the Little Rock University. She decided to go to medical school. She applied to the Arkansas Industrial University Department of Medicine, which is the forerunner of UAMS, but she was denied admission in 1888 because of her gender. She was not allowed to enroll because she was a woman. And so she ended up going to the Boston University School of Medicine, which was the earliest medical schools to accept women in the country. She, as I mentioned, she had been refused admission to the University of Arkansas, to the AIU Department of Medicine. So she goes to Boston, and Boston had been, the Boston University had originally merged a few years earlier with the New England Female Medical College. And the medical college, the Female Medical College, had been founded in 1848 and immediately accepted women then. So they were training women to be doctors as far back as 1848 when it first started. And they actually graduated the first Black female physician as well, Rebecca Lee Crumper. In 1873, the college merged with Boston University, and it became the first accredited coeducational medical school in the U.S. So Ida Jo Brooks gets admitted to Boston University School of Medicine. And while she's there, she does her thesis called neurasthenia, which is related to psychiatry. She was very interested in the psychiatry field. And so that's what she wrote her thesis on. She graduated from Boston University in 1891. She spent 1 year as an officer in the Massachusetts Homeopathic Hospital. And so that was her specialty was homeopathic medicine. And if you're not familiar with that, that is sort of one of the three branches of medicine, if you will, that was going on, that were popular at the time. You had the regular physicians; they were also called allopaths. You had botanical physicians that dealt with root and herbs, and then homeopaths. They followed the principles of Samuel Hahnemann, who you see here on your screen, and his theory was that a disease, whatever disease a person had, could be cured by giving them medicine that caused the same symptoms, or that produced the same symptoms that the disease did, and therefore it would sort of cancel each other out. So homeopaths were considered doctors, just as regular MDs and everything. But later on, the homeopathy thing it went out of favor. It became sort of like known as a pseudoscience. So, but in the late 1880s, early 1900s, I mean, it was considered, I think maybe not as respectable as a medical doctor degree, but it was still considered a medical degree. So, and you were still considered a doctor being a homeopath. So she gets her degree in 1891. She comes back to Little Rock, where she sets up a practice. And she sets up her practice at 219 East 10th Street, where she had a partner in her business, Dr. Alice Rowe, and they focused on sort of general medicine and general surgery at that field. So she wasn't really going into psychiatry at this moment. Interestingly, one of the articles that you see on your screen, it talks about her going to the World's Fair. That was the 1893 Columbian Exposition in Chicago. And she presented as a part of a fundraiser for Arkansas to furnish the building at the Columbian Exposition in 1893. Each state had their own building. And so for Arkansas to raise money to fund this building, she was part of a fundraiser. She gave a talk in the Senate chamber on the topic of women in medicine. And in that thesis, she talks about her career a little bit, going to Boston University, and that she urged that the University of Arkansas School of Medicine should admit women. And they would in the late 1890s, they would admit the first woman, Dr. I'm forgetting her name. Shopik was her last name. I can't remember her first name. Annie Shopik, and who graduated in 1901 as the first female graduate of the school. So you can see from the very beginning where Dr. Brooks was involved. She was heavily involved in medicine, of course, because that was her field, but she was also involved in sort of civil rights for women and equal rights for women. Also during this time, she was advocating for social change, especially in the public schools and in the medical facilities, particularly in Little Rock, the insane asylum, the state hospital as we know it today. And she was advocating in 1896 that a female doctor should be treating the female patients at the Arkansas State asylum, insane asylum. And she eventually filled that role, not only with that with the insane asylum, but also in the public schools, where she became medical director of the public schools. So in 1902, she continues her women's suffrage activities. Of course, you remember in 1893, she gave the paper about women in medicine and the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, visiting that. In 1902, she was actually one of two women, Arkansas women, who go to the White House to meet with President Roosevelt to talk about women's suffrage and how women should have the right to vote. Of course, this is 1902. You know your history, you know that's not going to happen for a few more years. That's interesting to note that she was involved in that from the very beginning. She goes back to Massachusetts for about a year or two, where she does work in the Westboro Insane Asylum in Westboro, Massachusetts. She's working with the patients there. And she goes back and she comes back there. She stays there, as I said, a year or 2 years. She comes back in 1906 and she resumes her practice on 10th Street that she had before she went up there. So she has this very successful practice going on. She's working with the public schools of Little Rock. She's as it shows on the screen, she's the medical inspector for the public schools. In 1910, she did 9,988 examinations of school children. But one of the other things that she did was she advocated for the establishment of a school for, quote, mentally deficient students. And she was very much an advocate for education for those who might not have received an education before. And so the school district actually established a school for kids with special needs in the basement of the Kramer School in October of 1913. That one, it was the only one in the state at the time and the first school of its kind in Arkansas. Unfortunately, they discontinued that school, not the Kramer School, but the school for the students with special needs. They discontinued that in 1917. In 1914, she is hired by the medical school here in Little Rock to become the first woman on the faculty at the University of Arkansas Medical School. Now, as you remember, she was denied admission in 1888 just because she was a woman. And in 1914, I think it's ironic that she becomes the first woman on the faculty at the med school. She is a lecturer on social hygiene in the psychiatry department, and she talks about her lectures. She's quoted as saying, on practical matters of health maintenance, such as diet, cleanliness, and emotional first aid. Later on in her brief tenure, she was there for 3 or 4 years. She was later named associate professor of psychiatry at the school. Now, at this time, she would have practiced, the medical school was sort of in a transitional period. They had moved into the old State House in 1912. So this is where the preclinical work and the administrative functions would happen in the old State House. The School of Medicine had built another school, or excuse me, the previous school, the second medical school at 2nd and Sherman Streets, is where they did most of the clinical work. And you can see the school, the medical school is on the far right, sort of that 3-story building on the far right of the picture. And then the building right to the left of it is the Logan H. Roots Hospital. And so that's where the clinical work was done. So she would have, Dr. Brooks would have been working both at the old State House, which when it was the medical school, and then also in the Second and Sherman Street buildings and Logan Roots Hospital right next door. So soon after, right after she takes a brief absence from teaching on the faculty at the U of A medical school to go up to do a sort of an internship, or she was a resident physician of the maternity hospital in Minneapolis. And this was a groundbreaking institution in Minnesota, focusing solely on pregnant women and their babies after they were born. So she went up there for a year, and where she worked, she was resident physician and superintendent of the maternity hospital, and then she came back to Arkansas. So she's getting all of this experience throughout these different aspects of the medical field. So she comes back to Little Rock. Of course, at that same time, excuse me, the World War I had started. The U.S. had not yet entered the war. She comes back to Arkansas around 1915 or after 1915, and she tries to enlist in the military service so she can sort of be a doctor on the front lines. She was denied that because she was a woman, but then she received a commission in the U.S. Public Health Service, which had an office here in Little Rock, and she served at Camp Pike, now Camp Robinson in North Little Rock. And so she served as a consultant in psychiatry at the rank of assistant surgeon. She was also there in 1918 during the Spanish flu pandemic, and so where she treated a number of the soldiers and was really instrumental in that work and in combating the flu pandemic in 1918 and 1919. After the war, she returned to the Little Rock School District, where she served as health director and psychiatrist for the schools. Now, continuing her work in women's suffrage, she still advocated for that. And in 1919, Arkansas became the 12th state to ratify the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. That was in 1919. I imagine, I've tried to pick her out on this picture, this photograph of the suffragettes on the Arkansas State Capitol, but I have not been able to locate her yet in that picture. I'm pretty sure she's probably in there. But anyway, so she was heavily involved in this. As I mentioned, Arkansas ratifies the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote in every election. Prior to that, women in Arkansas were only allowed to vote in municipal elections. So they were able to cast their vote for mayor and things like that, but they were not able to participate in the election of president and senators and stuff like that. Right on the heels of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, Dr. Brooks was nominated by the Republican Party, the Republican Convention of Arkansas in 1920 for the position of State Superintendent of Instruction. And so this is sort of like, this doesn't really exist anymore. Well, it doesn't exist anymore. It's the Department of Education now, but State Superintendent of Instruction in our state. So this would have been the position that was over all the public schools in Arkansas. So she was nominated by that, or to that position by the Republican Party of Arkansas. However, she ran into some opposition from government officials. Governor Charles Bruff would not really comment on whether she was eligible to be put on the ballot for this. And It was later decided by the state attorney general Arbuckle that yes, the 19th Amendment did give women the right to vote, but it did not give them the right to be on the ballot. So she was Attorney General Arbuckle denied her nomination for Superintendent of Public Instruction based on her gender. So she was not allowed to be on the ballot for that. 2 years later, she is renominated by the Republican convention. This time it had been settled that yes, women actually could be on the ballot. So it was not a question of whether she could or could not be on the ballot, but she decided that she did not want to enter that race. And she used it as her reason is that she felt that her would-be Democratic opponent was very capable and could do the job, and she did not feel the need to run against him for the position. But I think it speaks volumes of how much she was respected in Little Rock and in political circles simply by being nominated in 1920, right after the 19th Amendment is ratified, to be on a statewide ballot. And again, in 1922, 2 years later, them trying to convince her again to be on the ballot. She continues her practice in Little Rock, her private practice. She was only on the faculty at U of A for a few years. She goes back to the public school. She has her own practice. And she's very involved in the Arkansas Homeopathic Association statewide group. Remember, it's one of the three branches of the medical field. And so she was elected president of the Arkansas Homeopathic Association in 1929. Again, recognizing her really strong abilities in medicine and her standing in Little Rock's medical circles and political circles. So she continues that. She continues in her role in the Little Rock Public School. She continues her medical practice. She's very highly regarded in Little Rock and the state. She passes away in 1939. She had recently, before her death, she had fractured her hip. And she was taken to St. Vincent Infirmary. She was there for a while, and they just said that the stress and severity of the fracture of her hip were the causes of her death. So unfortunately, she died in 1939, and she was buried in St. Louis at Bellefontaine Cemetery in St. Louis. So just a really remarkable doctor, a remarkable person, and one who really gave a lot to Arkansas, did a lot for the state, and again, someone that I don't think is as recognized as they should. So thinking while I was doing research for this paper, I don't think that there's ever been really a fully comprehensive article written about Dr. Brooks, telling her story and all the things that she accomplished. So maybe if someone out there is watching and is interested, maybe you'll take up the mantle and do an article on Dr. Brooks. So that's the end of the presentation. I'll open up questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat box. And I failed to mention in the beginning of this, but these lectures are recorded, and after they are edited a bit, they're put online on the YouTube channel, on the Society's YouTube channel. So you can look at this, watch this one again. You can watch all the previous lectures that we've had, and tell your friends or recommend your friends to go check it out as well. So appreciate y'all being here. If there are any questions, please let me know. I'm glad to answer.
Hey, Tim, can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Back when you said Dr. Brooks was the first female on the faculty at what is now UAMS,
right.
showed an article, but I thought the article itself, a little blurb said she was the first female student at UAMS.
No, she wasn't the first female student. She was probably the first female student that was admitted was Annie Shoppick in
Okay.
1898, I think.
Okay.
And then she graduated in 1901. But Ida Jo Brooks had tried to get admitted to the medical school in 1888. So, about a decade before Annie Shoppick was admitted. So it'd be interesting to me to find out and to read what happened in that 10 years, that decade, when Ida Jo Brooks applied and was denied, and Annie Shoppick applied and got in. Sort of the thinking of the leaders of the medical school, and letting Annie in, and then of course denying Ida Jo Brooks in 1888.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And I also say Dr. Shoppick, she's another one who doesn't really get the recognition that she deserves, for what she did in Arkansas medical circles. But any other questions? Okay, well, thank y'all very much. If you think of something, please feel free to email me. You can use the hrc@uams.edu email, or you can, my email at work is tgnutt, tgnutt@uams.edu. So feel free to contact me there as well. So thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Thank you all for your support during this year. Look forward to a new schedule next year. We will not have one on January 2nd, but I will see you in February on the first Thursday. So thanks a lot, and y'all have a safe holiday season and a happy new year.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.